Amen.
Amen.
All right, here we are, our 4th episode. I can count that high. I'm Andy, got Seb in the studio with me to my left, and Pastor Jason, our first guest to my right. Pastor Jason Moore, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
Hey.
It's great to have you.
Yeah, he's a good friend, an author of multiple books, 5, I believe. Let me just read this little blurb on him I got right in front of me. Passionate about reaching people from all walks of life, Jason Moore has been involved in worldwide mission work and discipleship since the age of 16. While living in the Ukraine, he completed his internship in church planting, resulting in 3 new churches that continue to thrive today. As a graduate of Maryland Bible College and Seminary with a bachelor's in biblical studies, he leads the pastoral care team of Greater Grace Church in Baltimore, Maryland. He serves as a guest speaker in churches throughout the United States and overseas. With his wife, Leah, and son, Carson, he is dedicated to guiding people in discovering the riches of God's grace. This book is the 5th in the Inner Revolution series. And so, with Pastor Jason, we want to talk about that series and go from there. I got a book in front of me here, People Building. A great book. I'm familiar with his work. We've worked together in the past just for fun. He invited me along to tag team with him on a trip to China, actually. That went well. I love hanging out with this guy. And so if you could just tell me a little bit about the series and start there.
Yes. Well, great to be with you guys tonight and our listening audience. Just thinking about this series. You know, the first book, Inner Revolution, really the subtitle is, leaving mediocrity and entering dynamic living. And I just think in my own personal life, that's what I want. I don't want to just go through the motions. I don't want to just do it because it's expected, but really I want to touch the life behind the word, really experience the power of God in my marriage, in my family, in my relationships. So the Inner Revolution series really is really being changed from the inside out, not being superficial. So much superficiality today. We all know it. We all see it. We all know when we're superficial. God wants to bring us deep and wants to bring meaning, purpose, and just a lasting enjoyment in what we're doing, not just going through the motions. So I could talk about each book, but I'll wait for you.
Yeah, please. Change from the inside out. That's awesome. Living according to our purpose. Like, we're Christians and we understand our design. Like, that's been revealed to us. Like, life didn't come with a manual besides God's word, right? And we live by that, and we discover him, and then we discover what life's all about. Each of us have to get it for ourselves, right? And you are working inside the confines of a large outreach organization, Greater Grace, and all over the world, reaching out over 600 plus churches, and you've been instrumental in helping a lot of churches develop their in-reach ministry, and I'm sure you enjoy that, huh?
Absolutely. It's the toughest job you'll ever love, and why I say that is because you're dealing with people, and it's a beautiful thing hearing people's story, learning their story, and then loving them with God's story. And I think the toughest thing is when you see someone's potential and you have wisdom from God and it's not followed necessarily, or there's a delay in really responding to it. I think that's the toughest part, but the most beautiful part is just walking with people through their journey, the journey of faith.
I was just telling Andy today, I was thinking about you and, other people that counsel people on a regular basis, and thinking, man, you have to be able to, bring all of that baggage that you hear and people's problems, take all of that and bring it, to God. Otherwise, I'm not a counselor myself, but I could see how it would be super, super heavy to carry that burden all the time,
Well, it's a very priestly sort of ministry in the Hebrew sense of the word.
It is. You're right.
Right.
You're right.
Like, yeah, they're serving as mediators, and they get a word from God, and they give it to those around. And yeah, people are tricky business, and life's complicated enough, and then you throw,
You know what helps me, though? It's like, thank God that he's not trying to fix us. That's tendency of the male species, us. We like to fix things, get the drill out, get the saw out. But really, we present the heart of God, and he heals. And I think I feel like I'm learning every day, but you're learning to clearly articulate who God is and really bring the truth of the words of God in a gracious way and really help people connect to Christ's life. Like it's so important.
Can we start there, like God's heart for this? Like, you've got this verse right up front in the book, Jeremiah 31:4, right? How does that go? Again, I will build you, and you will be built, O Virgin Israel.
Yeah, that's a big verse. I mean, you look at that chapter, you look at the context of the chapters before and after. Israel is a mess. Israel's in sin. Israel is rebellious. Israel has moved away from God. And it's almost like through the prophet Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, he's speaking truth to a people that are not behaving in the truth. And it's like he's speaking life into people that are not walking in faith. He's almost speaking to their potential, and that's what the people building book is all about. It's really learning people, listening to people's story, learning what their story, loving them with God's story, then leading them beyond themselves. So, I will build you again. It's almost like he's saying something that they've not attained yet, but will. And so, how God looks at Israel in a perfect state when their condition is far from it.
Right. He sees something that we don't see in ourselves. That's God, right? Like, God says, this is what I made you for, and I'm going to coach you. I'm going to get you on the path, and I'm going to work inside you and do the work for you. Like, and what gets in the way, guys and gals alike, is our like personal identity crisis, that the way we see ourselves and how we fall short of we just live in disappointment almost, right? So God's word in the picture really.
Yeah, and it's amazing how when you're people building versus maybe a building, when you're building something, maybe you have an idea where you want to end up. Maybe you're building. Like, I love to build Legos with my daughters, in something we do together that's fun, that I enjoy. Apart from dolls and other things that I don't enjoy as much. But when you maybe have something in mind, you're like, I'm going to put this together, or maybe it's someone that can actually build a house, or you have a goal in mind. But I think with people, it's a little bit different. God has a goal in mind. He knows what he wants to do with these people. He knows what he wants to bring them, and ultimately, if they're born again, they will be in his image. But for us, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how they're going to respond to what we're giving them. We don't know what's going to happen. And that's amazing that you guys are, and I think all of us aspire to be that way, to have God's heart that we were just talking about for these people, that no matter what the response is, we're going to initiate. We're going to keep building, we're going to keep encouraging, we're going to keep initiating. And no matter what the response is, we're going to just do it.
It's important about what you're saying. It's, if we're expecting a perfect person, then we're just, our expectations are just going to be flawed all day long. It's just like a perfect kid, If I'm expecting my 5-year-old to be perfect, then I'm going to be super disappointed. But I think we were sharing with a couple tonight that our imperfections teach us about the unconditional nature of God. And that's very releasing, because none of us have it together. I think life in general is going to throw us curveballs. It's how we respond to it, and really are the detours, we're blown off course, but how we recover is so beautiful, because it's not about not falling. It's about how to get up. So our imperfections really teach us the unconditional nature of God. So in dealing with people, love produces the change. I can't change them. I can't fix them, no matter how hard I try, or we try. But love produces the change. It speaks to the very eternal purpose inside of us and creates something that wasn't there before. Just like God said, let there be light. and there was nothing that was there, and he created something from nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hope of the gospel. God creates something that was not there that we could manufacture.
Mm-hmm.
But we embrace what God says, and then all of a sudden we're built. And our condition may not look good, but God reminds us about our position, right? Powerful.
The Inner Revolution, like that title, makes me think of how, because you're saying being built from the inside, transformed from the inside out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Jesus, his ministry was misunderstood because they were looking for the outer revolution, like what's like overthrow the government sort of thing, put us, hey, we're God's people. That means we're basically number one, and like that's like setting up a. Anyways, Jesus had to like say, no, I'm working inside of you guys. The revolution's actually within you, right? And then that's going to have that. That's going to translate into the world. And what do you think about that?
I think you're exactly right. I think we're impatient. We want that outside manifestation. But really, when you think about how the temple was made, I mean, you had the rocks that were deep in the quarry that were formed and fitted and filed, and all these amazing, all this amazing process, and then it was brought up. It was done in secret. And I think as men and women of God, we are, God does something in us before he does something through us. We want to hurry up and do something for God, and God said, well, that's not how I do it. You might be 40 years in the backside of the desert, Moses.
Yes.
Wait a minute, that's not my plan, but that's God's way.
Yeah, I love that about God. That's one of the things that I do worship him for in my heart, is that he's out of time. He's not in a hurry with us. He has a plan, and it's just gonna happen, and he's not stressed out. He's resting in his love, like it says in I think it's Micah 6. And God is resting in his love. He's like a hero resting in his love, and he's initiating and initiating and initiating, and it will create a response eventually, and he knows that. So he doesn't get tired, and time is not an issue for him. Like you were saying, 40 years in the wilderness, that's fine. Jesus was 30 years old before he started his outward ministry, right? You could say, well, what was he doing the rest of the time? He was hearing from God. He was having a relationship with God, and then in due time, God, led him to start a ministry, and that really is something that really makes me want to worship God.
Yeah.
Wow. Good thought.
Yeah, and just comes to mind the phrase, love doesn't demand a change, it produces one, right? And so like our ministry or our worship is all born out of responding to the love of God.
Right.
And yeah. So this other books besides The People Building, what are the titles there?
So the first one was Inner Revolution, which talks a lot about what we're talking about, where we have an inner sanctuary or an altar life, where just like in the Old Testament, they would bring their sacrifice and they'd tie it to the altar, and they'd cut, and then there'd be blood spilt and or it was burned. I mean, our life is like that. We lay or surrender. Total surrender is a big part of the book, how to really let go of things, because we don't know what's inside of us. So life often triggers guilt, shame, and fear. Maybe life surprises us with thoughts of disappointment. So we lay ourselves down, and then God resurrects us into a new life. So Inner Revolution is all about that, where we go beyond the motion into real relationship.
Yeah, so society gives us the motion, and you're addressing the spiritual need. Like, there's so much motion and commotion, right?
Yeah.
And that's not addressing the need of people. And there's a breakdown, right? There's a collapse in their lives. And the pieces of the puzzle just don't come together. There's like you're addressing the spiritual need.
Yeah, I think there's an identity crisis that happens because people do what they're supposed to do, and then God doesn't do what he's supposed to do in our eyes. So really it goes back to this whole point where we lay ourselves down. We go from the altar life to the devotional life where he gives us a personal word. He says something personal to us. And then we enter the faith life where we see that word come to pass. So, life is, not always on our terms. And this is why he's constantly trying to bring us deeper. Mm-hmm. And it's not comfortable, but it's we have an anointing. We have a wisdom that is far beyond what we could attain, or it goes way beyond knowledge. This is the thing. We're in such an informational age. God says, I need you to go beyond knowledge, and I need to bring you into wisdom. I need to bring you into a place of understanding. Mm-hmm. And that's what we all want. Not just Google Christianity, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I like Google, by the way. Super convenient.
No, I think you make a really good point. I think we can all be mediocre at a lot of things. I think we tend to, Google everything. We tend to watch, like I try to fix my car on my own, and I look up, how to replace an alternator and things like that. And I had some semi-success at some things, but I think that because of it, so much information just leads you to think that you know so much, but really how much of it can you put into practice? How much of it can you actually be really good at? And I think we're all mediocre at a lot, and that's kind of a dangerous place to be. I don't think that's the life that we were meant to live. I think that it's better to pick one or two things that you can be really good at and tackle it and find fulfillment in your heart.
Well, maybe we could say it this way. There's a prioritization. Mm-hmm. Maybe you've heard of this picture. I thought it was amazing. You've only got so much space in your life. There's only so much you can do with your life. And you're kind of like defining your limits and right? Like, So the idea is like there's a box and you've got all these materials to throw in there, rock materials, and you get the biggest thing in there first, and that's like God. Then you get the secondary things in there, and that's like, very important secondary things like family and work and everyday life sort of things. And then you get the smaller sort of things in there like hobbies and entertainment. And, it gets all the way down to very fine stuff like sand. So it's like God's got to get in there first. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if you fill your box up with small stuff, you're going to realize, oh, yeah, I need God. And it's like you're out of space. And that's like approaching life from small to big when we need to approach life from big to small. And we're taking the time to think about, number one, God, and working our way there, right? Working our way down.
Absolutely. I mean, that's an awesome analogy, actually. If you think about what you just said, it's profound. Because small is the new big, they say. It's like we may think it's a small thing, but prioritizing God in my life really brings in the order and covering of God. If I don't have time for God, then we're moving without wisdom. We're moving without understanding. And we're moving without a covering, really.
Yeah, we don't live in a very reflective world or time, because there is no time for it, and you got to carve it out, right? We live in a very me-centered world where there's not space for God. There isn't space for God. Right. God takes up too much space. It's like, it's like you wouldn't set up something so huge in your house that you couldn't do what you want in there, and you wouldn't set up God in your life because he would be an inconvenience to what you want to do, your vision of your life. And that's the problem, right? When you've got a vision of your life that conflicts with God's vision, you end up having to choose one. Mm-hmm.
But what's amazing about that? Like, if we were to say, like, how many things do we really enjoy in our lives? I mean, we fight for so much, but when Christ is in the right place, then we really enjoy all the other secondary stuff, and family becomes so precious, and we have wisdom for relationships.
Yes.
Our stuff, our properties, our cars, and there's a supernatural covering. So when the right things are in the right place, and everything else has a beauty to it, we would have never discovered otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So, addressing the spiritual need, what comes next in your series?
Yes, Spectrums of Grace. This is communing with a perfect life. Kind of a funny story. My son and I were in the garden. It was a beautiful day, and this sun hit the prism of one of our glass ornaments in our garden, and all of a sudden there was a rainbow. I thought, wow, that's amazing that this one beam of light hit the prism, and then there was a spectrum or a diversity of color. And I thought, isn't that how it is with us? We fellowship with God's perfect life, and then there's a diversity of who He is in our life. Like our natural life reveals something perfect. So, I mean, that's really how grace transforms us. Like without grace,
That's awesome.
Without grace, it just is. It's dead. It's
Yeah,
dead.
this
Death.
isn't. There is the grace versus religion discussion to be had, right? And like religion, there's an outward conformity. Like we can tell whether you're fitting the program or not by what you do and how you look and stuff like that. The externals, versus the inward transformation that's nobody's really seeing, and then a unique, incredible individual pops out somewhere along the way. And so the grace has that effect. God's grace has that effect on an individual.
Yeah, and I think understanding that principle too, when we're people building, that we're not looking for, a specific response, that maybe we're letting God, His love come through, and we'll kind of be amazed at what the response is, what the final result is of all the investment that God's been putting into someone. Maybe we're looking for, I want this type of Christian from this person, but God has a complete different plan, and to be, I wanted you to say something about strategy in people building. How much do you go with strategy versus, like we were talking about, investment from God's love and God's heart?
That's a big question. And the book is really a lot of in-reach principles, and it's the last book of the series because there's some real practical tools. But I am a goal-oriented person, so I do have strategy in this sense where I want to really have a plan to be effective, but I think more importantly that the Spirit, you're relying on the Spirit to be spontaneous and personal, because people need a personal touch and not something mechanical. So, I mean, a lot of it is about approach. How you approach things is very important. So there's a lot of basic principles of how to really read the person, and or I think number one, how to listen. That's a huge thing. Watchman Nee talks about this in Discipleship, that he spends a whole chapter before you do anything, listen to them. Where have they been? What's the context of what they're saying? And then as you approach them, you treat them like fine china without assumption or presumption, which also creates a disaster. But you listen to their story, you learn their story, which means there's an appreciation for where they've been, and then you love them with God's story. There's a real understanding of where they've been, not only the bad, but the appreciation for the good. And then you graciously say, hey, the mirror of who God is consistent. Like, for instance, I love this cartoon of the cat that looks in the mirror and the reflection is a lion. I love this. And I saw that years ago, and I thought, that's exactly how God sees us. So people building, yes, there's a strategy because you want to be intentional, but you're not rigid. There's a flexibility. I think The 5 Languages of Love by Gary Chapman is a phenomenal resource where people's love languages are different. People are not cookie cutter, so.
Well, I want to go back to the diversity thing, because that's great. Like, I think I heard this, just to contextualize this a little bit, I heard this guy that was working with young people say this statement that I didn't sit right with me, and after thinking about it, I realized, I don't buy it. And it was this, that like, he said that in the young person's life, a young Christian, it almost seems, maybe he didn't mean it so strongly, but it almost seems necessary for a hyper-spiritual phase. And I don't like it because, if it's not supposed to be there if that's not what you're supposed to be, then it shouldn't be anywhere in the process, because it could mess up somebody. And do you get where I'm going with that? Like, the hyper spirituality is like the trying to make myself look good, or that, like, it's not really a responding to grace thing, and it's not really a Christ being formed in you natural process. It's a more like my hands involved, versus letting God do the work in me. So it's a legalism, it's a self-legalism trip, right? And I don't, young people, they say, like, okay, I'm in a Christian home and family and context. My life's in a Christian context, and I'm looking for people to appreciate me, and that my identity is being formed. I'm a fragile individual. I'm a young person that's looking for security and significance, right? And then if I'm not getting that approval that I'm looking for, then I'm in trouble as a person. I could break down, the identity crisis. So I'm willing to put on the show or the face that will be accepted and applauded and encouraged, because that's what I need to be. I need someone clapping for, that's got my back. And so I'm willing to do whatever they need me to do, and that even to be religious. And that doesn't go very far, right? So what do you think about that? That goes with your grace bringing out.
Yeah. That's tragic, but very, we see that all over the place. It's common. It's tragic, where we have to be something that we're not to be accepted by others. I think I'm writing on something now where just the value of transparency, the value of being deeply seen, fully known, and completely loved by God, like being comfortable in this sense where God, like, I love how the psalmist goes through Psalm 139, like, he is just a disaster, but he is recognition of being known and loved. And I think hyper-spirituality, I don't even like the term, but I get what you're saying. It's like when I have to fake it to make it, or project something that's not who I am, then it's not God. And I just want to say the balance to this. Some people say, oh, I don't feel like doing it, so I'm not going to do it. Well, the balance would be, if I'm obedient to God, then God will bring the desire. Okay, that we understand that. I don't feel like loving my husband. I don't feel like loving my kids. Well, if we do it by faith, God will give us the desire. But when I have to do something to be accepted and it's not who Christ has made us to be, then that's tragic. That's where we lose our identity. That's where we fake it, and that's where we will crash. Because really, God says, I know you, I love you, and I accept you. Yeah, transparency.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot. I think a lot of people will go years, being part of a system. Maybe they're acting the part, and they're playing their role, and they're showing up, and they're smiling in church, and amen brother and amen sister, and before you know it, they burn out, and you're wondering what happened. What happened to the well, they weren't living unto God. They were living unto people. They were trying to be part of a system, and eventually the system doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
Maybe, if there's an older generation working with a younger generation, you see the younger generation not doing what you did. You said because the older generation is tempted to say, hey, this is how I got here, and it was they'll say it was because I did these things, and since you're not doing those things, you're not going to get to where I got, and so I'm going to tell you this is what you need to do, right? So the older generation doesn't understand why the younger generation does what it does, and so instead of letting grace be born in them, the diversity effect, the spectrum, right? They might kill it for the young person.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you said it. I think you said it wisely. I think Hebrews 13:17 says, you follow the faith of the ones that came before you. I mean, the pattern is clear. It doesn't necessarily say we do exactly what they did, but we follow their faith, which is deeper, where we develop our own walk with God. We develop our own walk of faith. We develop our own convictions that we see lived in front of us. But I think what you're saying is key, because the value of trust, the value of, okay, let me give you a concrete illustration. Like, okay, I want that person to do something, but I'm not going to tell them how to do it. I want them to do it in their own creativity. This enables them to really experience faith and trust of God without telling them how to do it. And I think that's valuable.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake that maybe we make as parents too.
Sure.
I think it applies to just from one generation to the next. I think I see my child doing this, and I'm trying to tell him this is how I did it, and this is how it worked out for me. I think it's just a natural thing to do. I don't see it as an evil thing. I just think it's a natural way of doing things, and that maybe, just as a parent, we need to get God's wisdom and how to deal with it and how to put our arms around somebody and guide them, instead of pulling them or pushing them. I think in the same way we need God's wisdom.
Yeah,
applied.
I just heard someone say you've got to fake it to make it, and it was to a student. I'm over there at the school, and it just hit me like, I don't want to say that.
Yeah,
to them.
that's terrible.
They got to either get it or don't get it.
Right.
Yep.
They got to get it, right?
Right.
And that's the effort you put into it. That's where the work's happening, is you're putting into.
Or they might have to fail in it too. That's another option.
Yeah.
So failure is an amazing teacher. I mean, think about it. Okay, fake it till you make it. Okay, so conformity. I'm going to do what you're showing me to do. Okay, I get it. Eventually, maybe I'll learn. But really, failure is an amazing teacher. So instead of conformity, a form of godliness, I want a transformation. I don't want to duplicate necessarily what's next to me. I want to have the life from above transform who I am from the inside out. Because sure, we'd be a fool to ignore the people that came before us in one sense, because we don't want to fail in the same places they did. But it has to be a personal work of God, and this is where people are buried treasure. Discovery happens every day in our listening, in our learning, in our loving, leading others. It's like I want to discover the value that God's put in that person. And just be that mirror that says, hey, this is your condition. That's what we're so focused on, but really it's position. It's who God has made us to be. Focus on that. Don't lose that. And then when that whole dry season comes, maybe, failure is our greatest teacher in some cases. We don't like that, but really then, I remember one pastor in particular. I was struggling with something in seminary, and I was checking out, and he just came up to me, and he said just a few words that addressed a lie that I was just circulating in my heart, and it totally transformed my mind. And I just think if we're sensitive to the Spirit, we'll be sensitive to people. That's the bottom line right there.
Yeah.
I don't know how much this applies like in our lives in general, but I like this little tiny quote that I heard recently was that failure is practice. And I know, like, okay, if we're talking about sin, maybe not. Let's not just practice sin until we learn our lesson. Maybe we approach that a little bit differently if we're wise. But as far as, maybe you could say as far as someone growing and learning to be leaders, maybe learning to be a good friend, whatever aspect we're learning in, we shouldn't be afraid of failure. And I think I grew up in one aspect being afraid of failure. I was the pastor's kid, and failing as a pastor's kid, it's kind of it reflects terribly on your dad. And so you can, like he was saying, you can try to fake it a little bit so that you don't affect everybody, with your life. And instead, I would like to say, failing is okay. We're learning. We obviously don't take grace as a license to sin, but we are learning, and God is patient with us.
Well, yeah, if we're living under like that, where that performance thing, that's going to stifle creativity and diversity.
Correct.
And ingenuity. Like the inventor is like, I don't care how many failures it takes, I got to get this. And it's, the Thomas Edison lesson,
Yes.
like how many 1,000 light bulbs, versions of the light bulb he went through? I don't know. Yeah, what do you think?
You know, in that book, Spectrums of Grace, there's a chapter on wonder. And I think wonder is one of those things, or worship or worthship, is that it really helps us go from just the knowledge and the form to reality. It's like a spaghetti or like a good sauce. You can read all the ingredients and say, "Oh, I know that," but really we don't know until we taste it. So it's this unique recognition. It's this, wow, this value of what God has done for me, and it makes it real to me. You know, and we live unto the audience of one, and that's Christ. And it may be different, a manifestation, but it's still the same life. And that's the point of the book. Like, we fellowship with Christ, and He creates the ministry. He creates the transformation.
So what do you see on the other side of the book? You wrote it, and there's someone reading it. Like, how do you know what makes you happy? What's going on the other side of the book in that person's life? Like, how do you know that they're responding the way you want to your material?
Well, the whole series is it's a personal journey. I still feel like I'm on it. I think receiving grace for yourself is a huge key to transformation. You know, we've heard that term, just give grace to yourself. And how I understand that is we let God love us even when we're out of control, or when things are out of control. So when I hear people responding to grace and mercy and the finished work, that is the goal. Not to reinvent yourself or be a better person or improve, but to be strengthened from the inside out, to really have a ministry where God is loving me, God is building me, God is correcting me. So
not to emphasize the differences, but you've operated in Eastern Europe a fair bit, and I'm sure you could say something on what's going on over there in people's lives that's similar but different to this part of the world. I was with you in China, like I mentioned, and we talked about people building.
That was amazing time with you.
Oh my gosh, you were so like you split the class with me. I don't know why you did that, but
you had great
you let me get
content.
my feet wet.
It was incredible. Come on, knock it off. It was awesome.
No, that was
He was applying the principles of his book.
yeah,
That's what he was doing.
I know.
Confess those things that are not as though they are, right?
But that was 2 summers ago, I think. And
wow, time flies.
I know, and then you were, and then there's the Asia world, you know, like the grace identity, like when it's a very, what would you say, you know, it's performance.
Yeah, saving face.
And in the West, it's like, right, and in the West, it's like all merit-based system.
Production,
Yeah, like and then like in the West, it's like you're doing this for yourself. In the East, it's you're doing this for the system.
Yeah.
And both are just different versions of both are work systems, right? And that's an incredible pressure to live under. And then like God comes in and He reveals to you grace.
Yeah. You know, I think back living in the Ukraine, in the communist world. My first visit was in '87 in communist Poland, and then just moving over to Ukraine in the early '90s, and just seeing how a nation was stripped of their identity. You know, their faith was in communism, their faith was in their government, and then everything kind of fell apart. And then just being there and talking with people that had been lied to for years, and now they didn't know what to believe. And so presenting the gospel had a huge hunger. And my brother, Pastor Chris Moore, and myself, we just started small. We built on something small, and that's just teaching the word. And what happened is we reinstated a new identity that was not something that we could create, but we had to receive it.
Grace, like, responded to, like, produces incredible people.
Yes.
I mean, it's like what you're saying, the spectrums of grace, like that's what we preach, teach. That's our bread and butter in Greater Grace, like our ministry here. It's like the grace message. And there's been some very unique, fun, creative characters. And we work, I mean, you know, where we record, we're on this plaza, and there's a whole bunch of departments. And I love what the grace message does in a person's life. It's like, you be you, and God will take, you know, God's going to minister to you. God's going to get you what you need to get your life on track. Of course, we're going to need that, right? Mm-hmm. There's course correction, but like there's the means for the course. It's empowering. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's Jesus plus nothing, if I could just say that. Obviously, it's like whenever I add something, it's like it ceases to be grace. I think of, William Newell had an amazing passage on this, but, we don't help God. God does it all or nothing at all. And just again, getting back to grace, it's really Christ plus nothing. That's the glorious gospel. And I wonder how much in general of the gospel we really hear. Like it's usually, try harder or give more or do this, but really it's just exactly what you said. It's Jesus and me. And it's like I'm an individual, a unique individual, and we express a diverse color of God, the manifold grace of God, unlike anybody else. That's why God does not throw anybody away. And that's why he takes the broken and makes the most beautiful mosaic out of them, because they're precious.
So what we want to do here with this platform, and just in closing.
Wow, time flew by.
Yeah, we're having
good night.
Yeah, we're having fun. We're looking to hit this message to the 20s and 30s people. You know what I mean? Our generation, you could say. Our team of 5 guys land somewhere in there, late 20s, early 30s. And the subtitle for your book here, People Building Impact Generations. What do you think about this generation that's like, the millennial category? And what do you think about ministering in the 21st century? The game's changed a bit to you, do you think?
Yes.
What do you say?
Yeah. I'll just say the third, if I could just say the third book is on rest. Fourth book is on how to live in the moment, not to live in your past or live too much in your future. And then the people building is really how to discover people. And so when you're talking about our age, which is the age of knowledge, we're in a fatherless generation where technology is rampant in our world. And I love technology, but there's tremendous distractions if there's not the right balance. So I feel like with, just 20-somethings is to say that, go deep with God. Don't just be superficial. And get to know your Bible. The Bible is a love letter. God has open arms. There's no clenched fists. And I think as leaders, we're challenged to be creative. I think we're challenged to not just play church, but to really seek God. Because I think people want to be taught, but they also want to have a real exchange life, and I think that's our greatest challenge is there's joy, there's content, there's depth, but there's also Christ.
I wanted to get to this with you before we close.
Sure.
There's a skepticism of institutions, and the church is an institution, right? And what do you think about this principle of crystallization within an institution? This is actually in part coming from your work. Actually, this is the line: if crystallization happens to the machine, it becomes before the machine. What is it? It's a movement.
It's a move. I think it's man, mission, machine, museum, or monument, and then mausoleum. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Vance Havner's 6 M's, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, the church is an institution. Could it crystallize?
Yes.
Yeah. And then a movement comes from within, like a need for God, right? Isn't the Bible kind of like that? Like, time and time again, like, there's like this generation had it, then it got lost somewhere, and
yes.
And then the next generation picks it up. Every generation's got to get it for itself, right? Yeah,
I think things crystallize when we stop depending on the Spirit. That's kind of the point. If I'm just dependent on my systems, on my plans, on my mechanisms, my fancy marketing, then things will freeze up. Things will become, the risk factor will be less and less. Faith will be impractical. But I think when there's the man that hears a word from God, he gets a mission, God moves his heart, people start to gather around it. It becomes a machine that becomes efficient. But the key is dependency on God, prayer, faith, steps. And things stop moving when It's no longer convenient. Things become about conveniences and preferences, and then it becomes a monument. We begin to look at it and say, "Oh, that was nice," and it becomes something immovable. And then it turns into a museum where "Oh, that was great back then," and then a mausoleum. There's death. There's it's forgotten.
That's the
horrible.
Tomb, right? It's just a tomb, right? A mausoleum.
Yeah,
yeah.
And that can happen in our
Kills
in our
faith.
practical life, can it?
Yeah.
Mhm.
We can die from the inside out. Look at the Church of Sardis, right? They died from the inside out because the relationship stopped. It just was a regiment. It was just rigid. It was just a form, and that's a great fear of any of us. Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, because really it's about, what's timeless about our Christian life. It's the Spirit. The Spirit keeps moving. The Spirit is fresh. The Spirit is alive. No part of the Spirit is ever stagnant or dead, and all the other parts of, you could say, church, the organization part of the church, can change and should change in some ways, But if the Spirit is always there, there'll be room for creativity and changing things. And what I was thinking of just now is just having it be that God is always speaking in the church. And I read an article recently that said that the younger generation, it was said for a while that they were interested in entertainment and better programs, better things. Actually, they're not. The article I read just was saying they're not interested in that. They can get a better version of it outside of the church.
Oh, yeah.
If they want a concert, they can get a better one outside of the church. If they want entertainment, they can go to the movies. They have plenty of programs out there that they can pursue if they want. They're not interested in that. They're interested in something deep that will meet very deep needs in the heart, so.
Yeah, they want answers to their questions.
Right.
I feel like this generation is practical, and I think it's a challenge for us to always be, not the how-to, but to clearly communicate how to go to God, to pursue God. I think of Psalm 42:1, like, David said, "My heart panteth after you, O God, like a deer to the water." It's like, how does that happen? Well, that's a work of the Spirit. But if I can clearly communicate who God is, then that's something that's going to draw me, right? So absolutely, it's a work of the Spirit. And if it becomes mechanics or like, this whole linear 1 + 1 = 2, then I miss it. I miss God. I miss God right in the middle of the church. And I'll just say this: the church is a beautiful institution, but we understand we're connecting people to the life of God in the church, and people are the church, right?
And facilitating a movement, like the movement of the Spirit, which is what's going on in the church. Yeah, that's great. And then ministering in the 21st century. What's the challenge that you're working on now?
Yes, you know what? We do a lot of visitation, and we're just talking about connecting people, keeping connected to the right things. And, there are a lot of reasons why people come to church, but I think if they get the answers to their questions, they're loved, and they really are understanding who God is. It really draws them and gives them new priorities. So connections, and then also discipleship, mentorship. These are things that will impact generations, right?
That's great. So we're going to pray for that, for your ministry. We'll keep you in our hearts, your writing, your work, and thank you guys for tuning in, and see you next week.
All right. Awesome.
Where did that 15 minutes go?
Yeah.
Did we hit the target?
I like this this back and forth thing. It's kind of easy. You know what I mean?
So good.
Instead of having to sit and talk for 15 minutes straight, this is kind of like natural.
Yeah, and you guys had great content, great questions. It kind of triggered lots of thoughts.
Yeah, Andy's good at
That question at the end, though, I got to tell you, that was worth some time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, we should, because really, it is a huge challenge, because I'll be transparent. It's not like the traditional leadership. It's like really discovering, okay, what is that person's gifts? You know, I was going to talk about this, about the dike principle, where you pound a square peg into a round hole, and, you know, expectations and or what should happen, it sets that person up for failure. But uniquely understanding who that person is and then leading them to really develop and express themselves in their call it keeps them. So I think we have a lot of work like that to do. Because stereotyping, or you should do this, or because.
Do you think it kind of pushes the leadership, if they're at that place, to kind of go back and really figure out what's the fundamental things that we really adhere to?
Absolutely.
What's like the most important stuff
Absolutely.
that we'll not let go of? Because everything else is kind of superfluous. You know, it's like, okay, we don't have to hold on to these traditions. If it came down to it, we could let go of these things. But these are the things that